We're going to get started in just a second. Oh, I'm so close to so many of you, physically, emotionally. Oh, it's okay. Oh, gosh. Hi, everyone. Wow, what a orderly crowd of punk rock fans. My name is Allie Katz. I'm the program coordinator at the Writers House, and I'm very excited for this program, as all of you are as well. But I want to just take a second to thank Grace for coming. So let's give what a track. And to thank Anthony DeCurtis, who does amazing events, bringing people who are doing real stuff in the arts. And there's this is a perfect example of sort of what we hope Anthony can help expose Writers House and Penn students to. This is what it means to make a career in the arts. So it's very special to me as a person who knows both of them to see this happen. So a round of applause for Anthony. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Grace. And, sign up for our various listservs and grab calendars, because we are always doing fun programs. Not like this. This is a very fun program, but we do lots of pretty fun programs, too. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Allie. I'm Anthony DeCurtis, teacher in the creative writing program. And Grace, I'm proud to say, was one of my students. And, she just spoke in my class. It was just delightful. I was saying to them, I found Grace inspiring when she was a student, and I continue to find her inspiring. One thing she said to my students was that, she liked to say about herself that, she was a student at Penn, but she lived in Philadelphia. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And, that's rare, and it ought to be more common. And Grace is the sort of person who makes a city, a place, wherever she's living, happen. I mean, I used to joke about Grace, that she's curating everybody's artistic lives around here. There was, every time I ran into her, saw her, talked to her, she had all kinds of things going on. And, all of that adds important texture to our experience as human beings, really, but certainly as citizens of a particular place. So, we certainly, I feel I owe Grace a great debt, and I'm so proud to have her back, have her talk about her new book, this Kleenex LiLiPUT book, which there's so many great stories connected to it. I'm sure we'll hear some of it. Please come. Afterwards we're going to have a little reception. There's food. There's drink. It's all free. And check out the Kelly Writers House. This place. Grace is one of the people who really made this place what it is. And we do have great events here all the time. I bring people, plenty of other people. Every day there's at least one event, often two. So, check it out. They're all free. They're all open to the public. So, even if you're no longer or never were affiliated with Penn, you can just stroll in here and, enjoy yourself. So all this by way of saying, I just couldn't be happier to introduce Grace Ambrose.
Hi, everybody. It's so great to see so many people that from all different seasons of my life. And thank you so much to the Writers House and to Anthony for having me here. The Writers House and at large, and Anthony's classes more specifically, were very formative to me as a writer, thinker, citizen of the world. And it feels particularly fitting to be kicking off my book tour here in Philadelphia, which is a very special place to me. I lived here from age 17 to 23, which is a time when you're really figuring out who you are and what's important. And I always say it was one of the most exciting and special times of my life. And I'm thrilled to be back. And it's here in this city where I began playing in bands, booking shows, and releasing records, where I really learned about world building through art and culture, and where I began my political education. So it might come as no surprise to many of you that I'm going to make a request while I'm up here. I'm going to talk a lot about the freedom that this band makes me feel, their self-determination, their tenacity, and it feels really impossible to mention the words freedom, self-determination, and tenacity without mentioning the ongoing struggles of the Palestinian people that we're witnessing right now. And my life in punk taught me to appreciate this amazing music and art, but it also taught me how to center a just and compassionate politic alongside it. So I hope that everyone will join me in calling for an end to the indiscriminate violence happening in Gaza right now. You can call Jewish Voice for Peace, has a really amazing script for calling your senators and your representatives, and it just doesn't feel right to be using any kind of public platform without amplifying that. So on a different note, we are here to talk about this book that I just released. I recently edited, which is an English language translation of a book that was published in 1986 about the band of the same name. And I'm going to talk for a little bit about the how and the why of the book, and then open up for questions. And the designer, Connor Lumsden, is an Irish designer, is on his way from New York right now, stuck in traffic, but hopefully he gets here in time for some Q&A. And he's a delightful human. If he doesn't get here in time for Q&A, hopefully you'll join us for a drink or talking afterwards. He's been a huge part of this process, and I really want him to meet so many of you. Okay, so to zoom out a little bit, who are these people and why do we care about them? I stopped in Philadelphia on my way to Switzerland for one of my research trips, and I remember talking to my very oldest friend, who is here tonight, about what I was doing, and she was like, that is a very niche project. And she's not wrong, but she's also not totally right on that. There's that famous Eno quote about the Velvet Underground that, their first album only sold 10,000 copies, but everyone bought it. Everyone who bought it started a band. And I might go as far as to say something similar about Kleenex, who have become an extremely important lodestone for so many people at the margins, making strange and compelling music. I'm going to play a little footage of them now. I think a lot of people here are familiar with them, but some people aren't. This is Super 8 footage of them playing in their practice space. The sound is a studio recording of the song Hetty's Head, and it appears on their first record. Hetty's head is so grand, Hetty is so... I know these songs and I love them, so each time they appear, I try to remember what comes next, what words, what noise. I never can. At this point, these songs are nearly 50 years old, and all of that is still true. Their music is raucous and tough and catchy and funny. It's challenging, it's comforting, totally strange, yet perfectly pop. And no band has ever sounded quite like them. Kleenex was first Marlene, that's with the short hair on the top. She's the guitar player who wrote the book, and then Regula in the middle is the singer. Lislot Hau, Ha in Swiss German means thump or hit. She played the drums. It's a very fitting name. And Claudia Schiff, who's down here at the bottom, the blonde. There would be a couple lineup changes throughout the band's lifetime, but this is the one that sort of started it all. And then Claudia and Marlene have a special bond. They're the two that would stay in the band for the entire time. I discovered this band when I was a teenager through their CD reissue on Kill Rock Stars, who had released records by my favorite bands, Bikini Kill and Huggy Bear. As you did when you were a music-obsessed teen, you go to like the Kill Rock Stars catalog and you look like what other bands are on this label. And they had reissued a complete discography of Kleenex and LiLiPUT, and when I got it, it lived in my Walkman for a while. It felt like a key to a secret world, another layer peeled back to reveal the continuous existence of the international girl gang underground, knowledge of which had bounced from Zurich to London, London to Olympia, Olympia to my home outside of Washington, D.C., crisscrossing several decades in the process. And there are some members of the international girl gang underground right here. Just so many people I've met and spent time with in countries and cities all over the world. It's kind of amazing. Kleenex was to Riot Grrrl what Riot Grrrl was to me, proof of prior life on Earth, an inspiration, but not a prescription. I love this photo. In the book, they talk about this sort of kind of backwards deal they made with this agency that gave them a practice space. And in return, the agency like dressed them up in glittery dresses and put makeup on them and made them do a photo shoot. And they were just like, fuck that. We're going to do this with a self-timer in the practice space. And the agency was like, we're taking the cool practice space away from you and giving you the shitty one. They're like, are there plugs? Can we put our amps there? Does it work? All right, great. Sounds good. And I love these sort of homemade photos. They're like so in control of their aesthetic and their image. And I love like getting to know them through these photos and like learning to see their personalities and their relationships throughout. So listening to this music as a teenager, I wanted to know so much more about the people who made it, but there was no information about them in English. All I had was this sort of apocryphal story that was in the CD liner notes, which actually is totally true. So this is a photo of their first show. 3 women started a band. None of them knew how to play their instruments, but they wanted to make noise. So they did what so many of us did, which was like pick up an instrument and go have practice with your friends. And so they played this show at Club Hay, which was a gay bar in Zurich, which was sort of the center of the punk scene. And Rudy Dietrich, who is in the tank top that has spray painted Kleenex stencil on it, he was the first guitar player, and he was also in Nasal Boys, which is the first Swiss punk band, who have an amazing single and then kind of really tanked from there. But he was in the band, and after they played their 4 songs, everyone in the club was like freaking out and screaming for more, and they wanted to just play them again. And Rudy was really embarrassed. He was like, this is a joke. This is my like weekend fun band. This is not my real band. No one has ever responded to the Nasal Boys this way. And he refused to play. And Marlene was there. She had been to one Kleenex practice and listened to them play, so she sort of knew the songs. And she jumped out of the crowd and got on stage and played with them. And then the rest was history. She was in the band from that moment on. The music stands alone. It's amazing. You don't need to know anything about the people who made it to find it like thrilling, exciting. But don't you want to know more? Who wouldn't want to know more about people who made this kind of very strange, amazing music? I was so desperate for information and community and inspiration about this band, but there wasn't any that I could access. I was a really young person. I was a teenager. And that time, it always felt really unjust that there are like 1,000 books about the Beatles, but no books about my Beatles, you know, the Kleenexes, the Raincoats, the Bikini Kills of the world. And it turns out there was a book, but it was entirely in German, so I couldn't read it. Like many American punks, I learned about it in the early 2010s when Marlene's email address circulated on a listserv. This is a screenshot of a blog post where she was selling her copies of the book. She made 1,000 copies of the book back in the 80s, and it was never properly distributed. She was like selling them out of her house in Zurich in the 2010s. And you could email her and she would send you one, but also a record label here in the States brought over, you know, a couple dozen of them. And that's where I got mine. And my friends and I feel like everyone I knew bought one. Like, we were obsessed with digging up ephemera and history, and none of us could read a book, but we all had it. And this is a time, like the early 2010s were a really exciting time for musical discovery. It was like, I hate to be like, it was the time of Tumblr, but it was. And like the things that I learned about through Tumblr and blog spots with zip files and trading like MP3s with people. There's this big zip file compilation of, I can't remember what it was called. It was like the 12 CD, like the secret history of feminist hardcore or whatever. Like I know so many people in this room downloaded that. And it feels like that moment is kind of gone right now. That was a really special time. And I remember getting this book and just poring over my copy, gleaning information. There's a few English language interviews in it, looking at pictures of these stylish women and their amazing graphic design. Peter Fischli, who later went on to be part of Fischli and Weiss, the famous Swiss contemporary art duo, is largely responsible for their design aesthetic. And there are times where I was like punching tiny bits of information into Google Translate. You could use your camera to like AI translate something and it spits out mostly gibberish, but you could learn a little bit of what she was saying about Susie and the Banshees or whatever it was that had caught my eye. And the book looked something like this. It was called The Diary of the Guitarist Marlene Marder, and it told the story in her own words of her time in the band Kleenex, later known as LiLiPUT. The name change came like a year or two into the band after they had a lineup change, and at the same time a threat of a lawsuit from the Kimberly-Clark corporations. They decided, now's the time to make that change. It's filled with pictures from tour, practice, live shows, clippings from the music press, both positive and negative, interviews, fan mail, flyers, and all the detritus that comes with playing in a band. The contents of her diary will be familiar to anyone who has spent time traveling in a van to play shows to a handful or sometimes larger than a handful of people. They talk about frustrations with sound guys, the ritual of stopping for gas on tour, like what kind of snacks you're buying at the gas station, what kind of crappy food the promoter made you, the sheer joy of hearing your music played back on vinyl for the first time. I was drawn to this unique form of the book. It's so bold to publish your diary. And I was also drawn to this idea that there could be an alternative history of punk in it, one that was different from the neatly packaged, digestible version we'd been sold for so long. This book is unruly, idiosyncratic, it's strange, and I really love that and really leaned into it with this English version that we made. Marlene's book showed us what it felt like to be on the inside of their circle, but also the narrative that the outside was creating to try to make sense of them and their strange music. I had put the book aside for a few years, but I had sort of exhausted what I could get out of it as somebody who is a monolingual English speaker. And the news came out that Marlene had passed away after a 3-year pretty quiet battle with cancer in 2016. And there was a huge outpouring online. This band had meant so much to so many people that I knew, that I didn't. There was an obituary for her in the New York Times, which was longer than any obituary published in her home country of Switzerland. But still, we barely knew anything about her and her artistic music-making life. And I think that's something that's really common with women or queer people or people of color who are cultural figures. We don't get a full picture of who they are as artists or people or thinkers or makers beyond this sort of imposed significance of their femaleness or their queerness or their otherness. So it became really important to me that we get access to these stories of Marlene and also the other women and people around her who were so inspirational to so many people. So I wrote an email to my friend Iffy, who runs a record store in Berlin, and he's a huge Swiss punk band, and I asked him if he knew who I might get in touch with about making an English version of the book. He didn't know, but he knew he would. The amazing Lurker Grand. Lurker is a Swiss punk extraordinaire, like a crazy collector, a tenacious guy, amazing bookmaker, and this book is also his book. His connections helped me access so much of the information and material inside of it. This funeral announcement is from his personal collection. He edited a book called Hot Love, which if you ever see it, it's been out of print for a really long time. It's an incredible, incredible book, and just pick it up. Absolutely, it's the best. So then I wrote another email to Lurker, and I told him who I was and that I wanted to make the book in English, and who would I talk to about that? And I thought I would probably never hear back. And then suddenly, a few days later, I was signing a contract with Patrick Fry, who originally published the book, and securing a translator and planning my first trip to Switzerland. And there were a lot of moments during this project where I had a huge amount of imposter syndrome. This is my very first book. I guess I'll pass a copy around that people can look at right now if they want. And it was a super involved and complicated one. There's hundreds of images from archives, there's translation, there's multiple different kinds of binding. And on my first trip to Switzerland, I had to I landed, and then the next night I had to host a dinner for a bunch of fancy older Swiss people whose buy-in I really needed to make this happen. So I was 26 and probably didn't have a hairbrush and like, you know, cooking dinner for these people. And they're like collectors, artists, photographers, old punks. And so many of them were so shocked that anyone cared about this band. But eventually all of them let me into their archives and studios. And I couldn't have done this without, you know, other people who recognize the importance of sort of like digging up all of this information. I'm still amazed that I, an inexperienced but enthusiastic amateur, was entrusted to undertake this huge and sprawling project. It's funny, like Allie was like, this is how you can make a career in the arts, and Anthony brings people. This is not my career. It's my labor of love and hate and stress and joy and all of that, and very intentionally so. I don't think it could have or should have been done in any other way. A big part of the band's story is what happens when enthusiastic amateurs approach their work with equal parts curiosity and rigor. And the band produced an electrifying and enduring discography, and I can only hope that the book captures just a fraction of that feeling. This is a scan from an interview in 2010 in Maximum Rock and Roll, done by my friend Jess Scott, who is another she's like the only American I know, actually, that personally that met Marlene in her lifetime. Marlene came and saw Jess's band Brilliant Colors in Switzerland. Prior to this book, the most professional experience I had as a music writer and editor was working as one of the coordinators of Maximum Rock and Roll, the long-running international punk fanzine. As a publication, MRR is unique in a few regards, but most interesting to me is the fact that it's a magazine made by the people who it is made about. That is to say, an important part of its editorial ethos is that bands were encouraged to contribute content on their own terms. They did not need to be invited. There was no reporter intermediary pushing an angle. While I was there, I saw how valuable it was for people, particularly people who were often pushed to the side, to feel like they were a part of shaping new narratives, their own narratives, rather than being shoehorned into a linear and limited version of the past. I see Marlene's book in a similar light. She published it just 3 years after her band broke up, documenting the not-so-distant past and revealing a well-earned confidence in the importance of her work to a larger conversation. Working at MRR also prepared me for some of the messiness of the book I was diving into. The book is polyphonic. There are dozens of different voices at work in tons of different registers. All the band members in interviews, different critics, fanzines, Marlene's diary. And most of the writing is done by amateurs, which is not to say that it is not good or insightful or important, but that it has a lot of personality, or maybe it doesn't follow all of the same rules that a professional editor or writer is used to. That's where my amazing collaborator, Jen Kalea, comes in. Jen is a UK-based translator of German to English, as well as an incredible poet, critic, novelist, and short story writer. Her work ethic, and here comes Connor. His slide's coming soon, but welcome, Connor, the designer. Her work ethic puts all of ours to shame. She's a brilliant genius. I can't say enough good things about her. She's almost done right now with her critical memoir about life as a translator, which is also her PhD thesis. She's also a musician, and that's how she's toured the world with her bands, and that's how I knew her first, as my peer in the London DIY punk scene. It's challenging for translators to recreate writing like the writing I described because it's wonderfully idiosyncratic, which gives it a lively and personal quality. Jen was always there to remind me that translation is not responsible for cleaning things up or making them sound better or clearer. The translator's job is to make people sound like themselves. Jen did a wonderful job of this. Jen brought Marlene's voice into focus for me. It brought her to life, and it built a whole world. Throughout the process, I love this photo of them. It's like, I feel like they can easily turn from friendly into angry as a phrase that describes me and so many of my favorite people. Yeah, and this photo in here is by Andreas Zust, who play an important role in a little bit too. So throughout the process, with Jen, working on the text with her, we had to resist the urge to tell sort of this neat and pretty story. This book is not the definitive history of Kleenex or LiLiPUT. It is one band member's perspective in translation, in a package that is also a translation of the original book, a reinterpretation of like this scrapbook, come monograph, come memoir that Marlene had put together. And it's important to remember that though she published it, the words were originally written for her eyes alone. It's a diary. And I don't think she modified that diary very much before printing it. Sometimes it lacks exposition, sometimes it barely makes any sense, and nothing about her writing sugarcoats her experiences. She talks a lot of shit in the book, endearingly so, in my opinion. She is no bullshit, confident, brash, and brave. It's kind of amazing the confidence you have to put something that is like so frank out into the world when the audience that's going to receive it is people, mostly your peers who were there or who are being written about. In many ways, it's a really validating book. Fighting with your bandmates, sexist treatment from sound guys, being catcalled on the street. These are all things that are very familiar to me. And I think that sharing that whole picture, rough edges and all, is important for all conversations about feminism, art, commodification, struggle, and joy. In her lifetime, a lot of people had asked her to make the book in English, and she always said no, repeatedly likening it to the feeling of turning on the fluorescents at the end of the night after the show. This kind of like crash down into harsh reality. And I think she was in part concerned about these sort of these rough around the edge moments, like what would people think? Would it shatter this idea that people has become so important to people of what this band was, who they are, what they're doing? I can see what she meant, but also core to her self-presentation and the self-presentation of the band was a refusal to mold to preconceptions, embracing that, and I had to embrace that in the process. Like, the book that I made was not the book that I originally thought that I was going to make. And I can't help but think of, with this band, another famous Swiss idea, when attitudes become form. It seems very appropriate for them. But in the last conversation she had with Claudia before she passed away, she and Claudia are sort of the custodians of the band's legacy. She said that she really regretted never making the book in English, that was her biggest regret in her creative life. So Claudia told me that the first time I met her, and I really hope that Marlene would be proud of and happy with what we've made today. There are a lot of unanswered questions in the book, questions that I wished I could have asked her, and questions that I'll never know the answer to. And there are also questions in the book that I could answer, but I don't. I did a lot of research in conjunction with the process of making it, interviews, deep dives into archives, but that research isn't visible on the surface here so much. She wasn't interested in complying with the dogma of punk or the dogma of the women's movement or the dogma of music journalism. She wasn't concerned with fitting into a preconceived narrative, but all of those things cast shadows on her and her work. And it was sometimes difficult to resist confronting them sort of head on with the knowledge and the context that we have now and that I gained from interviews and, reading posthumous things about them. But the book very purposely resists the kind of oral history approach to music writing. I really didn't want this to be voices from the present looking to sort of recast or reframe the past. I really wanted it to keep the immediacy of the book that she made. So the research I did is woven in under the surface in the ways that the chapters are structured or the order and placement of the primary source material. And we tried our best to present contemporaneous primary sources in ways that would let you, the reader, best understand it in conversation with her diary. So you can draw your own connections. There's plenty of little aha moments for you to find when you read an interview, but then also read Marlene's account of, the same thing. This is something that in the original book, sometimes she would talk about an interview, but then she'd print the interview 15 pages later, and you're just like, can we please put them next to each other? And so that's a little bit of what we corrected. And that's all where Connor comes in. This is an amazing promo shot of Connor, his band Music City. If you haven't heard them, you got to. I remember him and I sitting down and he's like, Grace, what the fuck are all these footnotes doing in here? This is not the vibe that we're going for. And I was clinging to the idea. I had done all this hard work. I want to give the people the people of the world need every tiny detail because there are not going to be 1,000 Beatles books about Kleenex. This is the only one. And he, as most good designers do, gently and carefully pushed back on me until those footnotes and over-explanations disappeared in that form and found their way into the text and into the book more organically, more subtly, sometimes not at all. He worked so thoughtfully with me to make this book, which is, it's a book that's clear and beautiful. I can say this about my own book, I guess, our own book. It's beautiful, it's well-designed. In our very first meeting, he came to me with the idea to have these pages sewn in throughout of a different color. So in the book, there are these pink pages, and it's the English translation And you can read the English translation while looking at the text in its original German context, not for the diary, but for things like fanzine interviews. So you can see the important components of design without doing that really. We hate this thing where people like fake digitally typeset old typewriter font into the old fanzines. If you do it, it's fine, but we don't. Me and Connor do not do it. So he came to me with this amazing idea. That, that's the thing. It's like I would never have thought of that on my own. And I think the printer maybe cursed us for this idea. Like it required many pages, or no, they just charged us for it. The pages had to be like sewn in individually. They couldn't use their fancy stitching machines. But I think it makes the book so special. And our version points to the original in a lot of ways, from some type choices and paper choices. But it's also bigger, and it's in Technicolor. It's in color as much as it can be. The original was totally in black and white. The original was always our guide, and it was always about how can we honor that, but also improve it, expand upon it, like make it really sing in the way that it always should have. And Connor is also appropriately, like Jen, someone I know from traveling in punk bands. I knew, like Jen, immediately that he was the only choice for this project. And we worked almost entirely remotely on it, save for a couple of days spent together at a residency in the Swiss mountains, which was pretty great. That was nice. There was like a marathon 2 weeks earlier this year where we were pulling, Connor lives in Dublin. We were pulling 12-hour days despite a 6-hour time difference, both like hunched over like gremlins on the computer, staring at, like arguing over pixels. And it's very gratifying to see the fruits of our labor today, and also to have such a great collaborator. So he's going to join me for the Q&A later, hopefully. So think of your cues for him. There is visually so much to work with. And there's also so much in this book that, in the original book, and also from like the things I found in archives, that is not included in the book. It was initially tempting to kind of go with this totally maximalist approach. Again, the Beatles thing, like they're not getting another book. Should we put like everything in here? And the wise Connor and some other, it's like, gotta let it breathe. You gotta pull some stuff out. We left a lot of great things out. There are things for you to discover that are still out there. And we did make edits based on things that we found that Marlene wouldn't have had access to. And one of my favorite things that we included that wasn't in the original was when the Raincoats and Kleenex went on tour together, the first tour of the UK, they kept a collaborative tour diary. And it's a book that I wish I could make like a total facsimile of the whole thing. I feel like I should ask Anna and Shirley if I can put it up online, because it's amazing. Like all the band members are writing different diary entries. There's tons of candid photos. I've reproduced as much as I could, like in the book, without making this book just like the Kleenex Raincoats tour diary book. But I love this one. This is, the Kleenex. It's hard to believe maybe, but Kleenex and the Raincoats both did chart in the UK multiple times. And this is their sort of take on, the charts for this week. Endless rubbish, and then these two. And the Raincoats were another example of those kind of really generous collaborators who, sight unseen, welcomed me in, and a really good illustration of sort of the long, deep roots of, a contemporary modern DIY punk scene has connected to stuff that happened 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years ago, and how important that sort of intergenerational connection really is. Also, when she passed away, right before she passed away, she disposed of a ton of the original material. Like, I think that's an impulse that a lot of people have right before they know that they're going to be like leaving us. And so there's a lot of things that we could never get, particularly sort of candid snapshots and fan mail. We tried as much as possible to reproduce everything from the original. So from an original flyer or original fanzine, or as much as possible from original negatives of photos. There's a couple instances where something was so good in the original printed book that we did a reproduction from there, but the quality is just not, when you're taking from a printed thing, scanning it, re-outputting it. So there's a couple things that we just weren't ever gonna have. So you can, like, people who still wanna find a German copy, there's plenty in there for you to still discover. And I'm just going to cycle through a couple of my favorite images, just excerpted from the book. This is, I wish I had my tote bag. This is a logo for a chain bakery in Zurich. Normally the guy's carrying a little baguette around with him. And Claudia, last time I was in Switzerland, gave me a tote bag of him with a baguette. This is a flyer for one of their really early shows. And in January 1979, and free entrance. And this is a Peter Fischley design too. I love this. This is a puzzle they made of themselves. That it's like I believe the Swiss collector Sam Mumenthaler lent this to me, and it's just kind of amazing. Where you're like, who held on to this for so long? They went to, the equivalent of going to CVS and getting your mug or your tote bag made. They got this made, and then they printed it inside of the UU sleeve. There's a line on it that says like cut here, and you could cut open your sleeve, and inside was a black and white printing of this puzzle. So it's something that like most people are not cutting open their sleeve, though I have 2 copies, so I will be cutting open one of mine. But it's just these things. There's so many little details, and Claudia's wearing a Kleenex button right in the middle of their shirt, and so is Marlene. This is another Fischley. It's so simple. This is like their 3rd show, and they're getting billed higher than like XTC. And I just love the feeling in the book so much. We tried to preserve as much of these kind of like artifacts as possible. The sellotape that you see here, I love this one. They also made little band postcards, or the return address was the name like this and that little musical note. Here's the front of the U sleeve that on the back would have the cutting out. Again, another Fischley. And it's amazing. In the book, even the very earliest days of the band, perhaps even the most so, were extremely well documented. She saved the fan mail that they got even from the very, very first days of the band. And it's really important to remember, I think, it seems kind of obvious to say, but these are the days before computers. Like, to have this, to reproduce it in a book, you had to have had the actual thing. You couldn't go online and find the Facebook event that had the flyer for your show. Or make a scan of it. Really, you had to have everything. And her foresight to have kept all of that and to understand that this was a project of building a legacy is really unbelievable. She also she made a book about her family when she was a kid. It's like the history of her family from age 5 to 25 or something. I've never read it. It's only exists in very scant copies. It's just printed on typewriter paper, but that's something I really wish I could have that's one of the things, like, more so than the experience of being in the band, which I think she captures so amazingly in her writing and in the book. That's something I wanted to talk to her about, like, why did you do that, and I just want to understand this whole impulse. This is a selection of like contemporary bootlegs that have been made of the band. From Brazil, Los Angeles, London, Minneapolis, another one from Brazil. These are hand painted by this artist Lixero in Sao Paulo. I have one of these hand painted the white LiLiPUT shirts, which I feel like I've never worn because if I'm just gonna like immediately dump a cup of coffee all over it. But also it's sort of, it's a punk shirt. It's a handmade bootleg. It's fine to dump coffee all over it. And then this last one's from Ukraine. It's done with bleach. And I did create a new section of the book that was not reflected in the original, which is at the end, which is sort of this posthumous look at the band, but very intentionally it was centered on the voices of fans and people who like really loved them. Our friend Ray Aggs, there's a scan from their fanzine that mentions Marlene. There's the Maximum Rock and Roll interview, and then there's also a couple interviews with the band looking back. And it very intentionally is very much about fans and the band themselves. And it did feel important to give voice to that, but also to not do it in a way that was, we are doing this interview in service of this book that's a history. It's more still pulling from primary sources that happened to exist. And I love this poster. This is a poster for their tour. their last tour of Germany that Claudia drew. One of the most special parts of the book is all of Claudia's little drawings that she made that are kind of incidental drawings of the band, where you see the characters that she's designed for each of them, and once you get to know their faces and their sort of mannerisms, it becomes like extremely clear who is who. This is one of her more involved drawings. She has some that are like slightly more just simple that are really amazing. I'm obviously a super fan. I spent like 6 years working on this. But they're so inspirational to me in so many ways. They were totally uncompromising in their vision for the band. That meant the music, the art, the way that they did business, and the way they conducted themselves with the music press. You can see in the diary, this caused a lot of internal stress in the group and strife in the Zurich music scene with the people that they hired and fired who were managing their affairs, some of whom were also romantically involved with the band members. And they were in sonic conversation. They were on Rough Trade Records, the early days of Rough Trade, and they were certainly in sonic conversation with those label mates. And Mayo Thompson was involved in recording them. And Jeff Travis helped produce them. But they really did exist I think, still exist entirely on their own. It's a sort of easy, lazy comparison that lots of music writers make. Though this band sounds like Kleenex, but it's almost never right. And they refused to embrace sort of the stereotypes of the punk movement when it came to sounds or aesthetics. And in fact, quite purposefully, were not spiking their hair and wearing studs, even though that was like very much the milieu that they were part of in Zurich. And I think that's part of the reason why, even though spiking your hair and wearing studs is really cool still, I feel personally. But that's part of the reason why so many decades later, they really stand alone. And this is Connor and me in Switzerland in this room that was, it's this panoramic room, and you're at this residency, which I really encourage everyone to apply to. It's at the Alpenhof in Oberegg, which is about 2 hours outside of Zurich, and it's a library. Andreas Zust, who is a photographer and an artist and a polymath, it's his personal book collection in an old hotel. And it was like me and Connor and 4 other people in this old hotel on top of a mountain where you can't see anything. When it's dark out, you can't see anything for miles around. And one night we got out his collection of singles, and we had like this party. Bea, who was our sort of like our evil foil who worked at the hotel, not evil, she was very lovely, but we were somehow always breaking all the rules and like doing something wrong. But she knew had been punk, and she knew that we were interested in this, and she brought a record player one day, and she showed us where Andreas' singles were, and we had this party where we were listening to the singles, 6 of us, like strangers when we met, on top of this mountain in this big empty hotel. It's snowing. We're dancing to records. Connor had like not brought real like a jacket. Basically, it's snowing. It's Switzerland. It's cold. It's beautiful, and we're just dancing to records in our socks because you can't wear your shoes inside. Big no. Even if you're inside for 1 second, can't do that. And the people I had met there, they didn't have any context for Kleenex outside of the work that I was doing. They knew that I had come to Switzerland to like make this thing. And they're like, that's great. You're nice. We like you. This is cool. But when the singles came on in this dance party, which was also, we were playing soul singles and other punk singles and rock and roll. And they said, like, we played them again and again. And they were like, we understand why you care so much about this band and this story now. This is amazing. And, like, what else could you possibly ask for your music, half a century later? And that's the thing with this kind of work. Like, it always has to come back to the music for me, right? That's the magnetic pull. Like, the most moving parts of the book for me are when Marlene taps into the sort of sublime parts of making music. Like, that feeling you get when you put your record on the record player for the first time, that you hear your music coming out of it, and that the electric connection when you have those bandmates. All bandmates are special, but some are like, you lock it in. And they're like, that electric connection, so amazing. And she talks about that, like the very first time that she plays with them. And then the feeling of, I remember that the first time this happened to me, like I started playing instruments really late in life, and when you can hear something in your head and then you finally know how to play it on the guitar, like when you finally can translate idea into form. She talks about all of that. And for me, that's the stuff. That's the stuff. They're the sound of potential, of total freedom, of joyful noise, of what is possible with imagination, determination, and tenacity. Punk is amazing because your heroes can become your friends and your friends can become your heroes. Ordinary people making extraordinary music. And I really hope that limitless feeling is captured in the book. The process of making it certainly opened my eyes to what is possible. And thanks for coming. And if there's any questions, if Connor wants to come up and we can answer, Zoe. Oh.
This book is really very, very beautiful and very important. I'm grateful to all who worked on it, but most grateful to Grace Ambrose, who is a genius, and I love you.
Zoe, I love you. The book is available for purchase out back. They're only about, not to be doing a sales pitch right now, but there's only like 300 copies left, basically. I made 2,000. That was the deal with the estate, and the response has been like more than we could ever imagine. So most of them are going to stick with us for events and stuff like that. Yeah. Any questions?
I don't need the mic. It's fine. I can talk very loudly. I would assume the book was, unless I need the mic. All right, fine.
There's people watching on the internet.
Yeah, that's fine.
My mom, Yoni, my mom wants to hear
Okay,
you.
fine. I would assume that, is this, am I?
Yeah,
going through
good.
it? All right.
Yeah.
I would assume that the book was originally released as sort of more of a personal thing. Here's my diary, here's like my history. I want to document this. I guess other people would want to read it, maybe. How does that change with this new, translated? Is it still the same purpose? Is it a different purpose? How do you see the purpose of the book now versus when it was first released?
Yeah, so the book was the first book published on a publishing imprint that went on to become Edition Patrick Fry, which is like the biggest and most important art book publisher in Switzerland. They mostly do photo books. Patrick is a really sensitive and generous editor and publisher. So I would say it was originally published to like be a book in the same way that we were. It was like a small DIY thing. And I don't think like it wasn't meant to be like a fanzine. Like the original has an ISBN number. Like I think that the networks of distribution that I'm lucky to, have right now, which include relationships with record stores that I've had for, 10 years of running my record label, maybe weren't accessible to them then. And also like, I think it is a case. They were definitely well liked and popular in their lifetime, but much more so now with a sort of cult interest in them. The purpose of it now, I mean, it's to tell the story in her own words, right? And to give shape to this idea that has persisted for so long. I mean, something I write about in the introduction, some of this talk was pulled from the introduction, but something I write about is like this huge feminist importance that was ascribed to the band by so many people because we didn't have anything else to go on. So we were just like, they are cool women making music. Yes, this is amazing. All of that's still true, but that's not the understanding of the band in Switzerland. It's not the understanding the band had of themselves. In fact, they existed sort of outside of this explicitly feminist punk scene there. Marlene, who was a lesbian, she had the choice at one point to keep playing this sort of like Olivia Records style music with the other queer women that she knew, or to play this, fucking amazing rock and roll punk music with the like beautiful straight art school students. And she chose them. And for a lot of people at the time, they were like, wow, you burned us or whatever. But it's like, it's more than that, obviously, right? You can't be reduced to like these labels of who you are. And this idea that you want to complicate that is part of publishing this book. And part of the reward of the book is the nature of reading someone's diary, where you get to see how her perspective and her understanding on like what it means to be a woman playing music changes. Because, it's really easy to say, it doesn't matter that we're women playing music. because you want to be understood as like more than that. But you can be understood as more than that and also be understand the importance of like what that means for people who are watching you, for people that are, seeing you as like an example or something to look towards. So I guess the goal for this book is just to like offer them the depth and the rigor of attention that like so many other bands get by like allowing this story to become accessible in the language that most of their fans speak. Does that answer the question? Cool. Cookie.
Hi, long-time listener, first-time caller. Grace, you mentioned that there were questions you wished you could have directed to her. And I know you shared at least one example of that during your talk, but I'm really curious of what remains, what you remain curious about, what you wish you could have gotten clarity around, any open-ended things around that. Thanks.
Yeah, so by its nature, the book, so the first section of the book that she writes is sort of this retrospective look at the band a little bit. Like, it's unclear to me when it was written or whatever, but it's definitely more of a narrative, and it's not this sort of diary entries. The diary entries document like 2 tours in the UK, 2 tours in Germany, and there's not much documentation of what life was like back home in Zurich, because when you're at home, you're maybe not keeping a diary. You're not having these new exciting experiences. So that's something that we really had to piece together a little bit, an understanding of. But I'm really curious about how they fit into this sort of, people think of Switzerland as a place, they don't have problems in Switzerland. That's not true. There's a student movement there. There's like, challenges of being a young person, a queer person, like a working class person, that all exists there too. And it would have been great to talk to her about some of that, like what life was like at home. Also curious, I think Connor probably too, she plays a PV amp in a lot of her recordings and stuff like that. And I think I'm a PV head, Connor's not. Solid state, he's not into that. But I would love to talk to them more about the recording process, and like Sunrise Studios, where they recorded a lot of their music, is a really important part of the Zurich punk scene, and just understanding a little bit more about those kind of like nuts and bolts and being at home. And just certain questions too about like, who is this person that you keep talking about? Like, or what this, or like why, just not necessarily anything that's important for the understanding, the big picture understanding, but just some of that. I just would have loved to meet her. It's like, in some ways it's hard because, right, it's easier to make a book in a lot of ways if the person is not alive to be making it with you, because there are choices that you have to make. There are, Connor and I got in plenty of fights. So like, I can't even imagine if this,
close to wishing
yeah, but yeah,
one
one was dead. But, yeah, I hope there aren't too many like, major questions that are left unanswered, but also a little bit of mystery is good for everybody.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about like the aesthetics of the band, because I feel that's something that really holds up and drew me into it, like from the record covers and the logos and the little symbols and things, which is something bands to this day really still hark to and rip off, my own bands included. And I wonder if either of you have did you unearth any info about how they were so strong on that from like the beginning of the band even?
Some art context.
Yes, well, it's mostly down to Peter and Claudia were the 2 collaborators. So Claudia, who's the bass player, is still a painter. She's a professional artist. She's an amazing artist too. Like, she's had a really long, rich career, and they were related to the art school there in Switzerland. And I think part of the way that you can like chalk it up to being so good from the beginning to the end is that there is a through line where it's Peter and Claudia were working on it this whole time. So it's not just like you brought someone in for this record or you brought someone in for this flyer. There's a photo I wish I had here to show you, which is I might steal a book and show because it's so good. Sorry. Yes, it's showing. Do you know which one I'm about to show? God Christ. It's like how they made a record before Photoshop and computers, kind of. And it's these photos of them, which here we've reproduced some of the excerpts from the contact sheets. But here, this is their first record, and it's made with spaghetti and Fisher-Price like plastic records. And there's a whole set of photos, we didn't include all of them, that show the process of sort of building this on the thing. And I think part of it is that the whole band was involved in like everything, right? You know, I feel like you and I probably have both been in bands where like some people are like, I don't care what the art is, it's fine. Like, and I think the fact that they were all like so all in and so interested in organizing and constructing their own photo shoots and stuff like that really played a big role in it. And then the book in general, like just the Swiss design is such a rich history, which they play with in some ways. And that's part of why like Connor got involved, because we were like punk and Swiss design, two great things that we love. And yeah, I think it's true. Like their aesthetic is amazing. And there's also things that I don't have explanations for either. Like the Killer Rock Stars or Mississippi on their recent reissues, they've really been using that, like the cat and the skeleton of the fish, which only appears in like one image that I could find of anything. And there's nothing that they've written about it. And it wasn't an important part of like their aesthetic at the time, but now it's become this thing that's like, I know people who have that tattooed on them. It's synonymous with them. So it's really interesting to think about like what becomes sort of the like signifier for the band, right? When we don't have the whole story. I think part of it is also, it's like they're having fun. Like that's a really important part of this. They write about, you know, in her diary, she writes a lot about challenging things, but then also is like these moments of ecstatic joy. And like, what does it feel like to make this thing that you're not making any money off of? Like, I mean, they were a successful band, but they all always had other jobs. You know, there's some later tours that are talking about, you know, each living off like 5 pounds a day, like, you know, but they put everything into this. They like took it seriously and, while still having fun with it. And I think that's a reason why that design is so successful. I'd love to like one day do something where I publish a lot of the images that weren't included in the book online too, so that people can see all of that. They're amazing. The design stuff I love. And the little guy on the flag is just like, you can't beat him.
Sorry, I was actually going to say I really love like this time period, because I also feel like, Gina Birch is doing her art still. You have Jean Caffeine from Pulse Alama, who's doing amazing collage work, and the artwork that they used for this is amazing. I hope that you'll consider doing a book, especially if you have access to all those archives. That would be amazing. I was curious if, when you had the translation done of this book that you had in your possession for so long, after not being sure if something meant this or not being sure if something meant that, now that you had someone who is almost like a legend or a key for you, did you come away with a touchstone from any point in the diary that you used throughout the process of putting the book together? Or like something that she said that really inspired you and like you kept coming back to?
Yeah, there's God, I wish I'd written it down. There's a sentence that this was the first sentence that I read that I was just like, this is like, okay, they're talking about this sort of like, they didn't want to practice at this house anymore. They practiced in a bomb shelter for a while. Then they wanted their own practice space that was like more of a practice space. They made this deal that I was talking about earlier with this management company. And they talk about, so, you know, they were getting a lot of attention. They weren't sure why, but they got access to this practice space, and all the other bands there they thought kind of sucked. They weren't into it. And they said, the other bands thought we were very funny, the way we played this outrageous music, technically wrong with total conviction. We didn't care. It was fun. And I feel like that sentence for me, it's 2 pages into the book. That sentence for me was the first one that kind of like made all my hair stand up on end and be like, that's it, right? Technically wrong, but with total conviction. You know, one time I was playing guitar in a band, and at the end of the show, my hand was covered in blood. And a guy said to me, like, you know how you can avoid that? And I was like, and he was like, with a little finesse. And it's like, that's the thing where like you're just like, I don't even have to explain that to anybody, but I feel like it's like this technically wrong with total conviction is how I want to approach everything in my life almost. That's why I have Connor here to be like, this is how design works, and no, you can't do that. I am canceling you. But also breaking the rules. We did break some rules. Yeah, so yes, yeah. And I think you're right about all those other women that you named, and also too, like Anna Da Silva from the Raincoats too is still a visual artist, is still making incredible solo music. She is like the shit. So that's very articulate. Anna Da Silva is the shit, like, you know, but she is. And I think it's true. This generation, you know, it was before. They were interesting. It is a reaction in some ways. I mean, they went to London and they went to the King's Road and they loved, you know, going to like sex and like, you know, all of the like punk fashion of the time. But it's also a reaction to that, right? Like, we're doing this thing that is different from that and for a different reason, and we're gonna keep doing it. And you know, they played with Stiff Little Fingers, which is like cool gig, honestly, fun, like would be there. But yeah, I think it's really interesting that there are so many people that like endure from this time, that like maybe they were able, because of the conditions of the time, to kind of like build this base that they could then work from to have this sort of like longevity and long lasting career.
Did you, when you put the book together, did you consciously sort of try and not tap into other people's opinions, like the band members or somebody else that was around the band, to preserve sort of Marlene's story? Was that a conscious decision to do that? Or did you even do that? Maybe you did talk to a bunch of other people to sort of inform the book.
I did talk to a bunch of other people, like everyone whose archive that I went into, and Claudia, and the translation of the text after we edited it was reviewed by a guy named Sam Mumenthaler, who's a Swiss rock writer and a, you know, collector and of the time. But it really was, and there is one redacted name from the book from one thing that happened, which is not even that crazy. It's like someone got really high and did something funny, and they're like, do not print my name. And I was like, I will not, it's out. But that's the only redaction. Yeah, it was kind of like, you know, there was some like fact checking involved with people about certain things, or like, can you help give me clarity? But the beauty of the book is that so much of the primary source material is there. So when you're trying to figure out like what show she's talking about, you can read about it in the paper that she also reproduced to figure out like, oh, this was happening here or then, or with this band. And again, that's the kind of thing that I didn't like, wasn't like drawing arrows. We weren't like drawing arrows for you in the book, but really trying to like, I mean, it was really tricky, the layout, right? Because of the way books are made, how this pink paper is bound in can only happen like at certain parts of the book. So figuring out the cadence and the rhythm of it was really challenging, like drove me to tears like several times probably. But yeah, it would be a different book if we had like all those like voices like correcting or amending the past. And that's why it's like I'm really trying. I was very nervous to put the book out into the world because for so long people were like, you're writing a book. And I was like, I'm not. I'm making a book. And it's not the Kleenex book. It's Marlene's book. But it's also the Kleenex book because that is her thing and she's the custodian of it. And I felt confident in doing that because it had already been published much closer to the time when people's memories would have been like more accurate, or people would have maybe been more like sensitive or concerned with what was happening. And to my knowledge, discussing with lots of people that there weren't issues. Though I will say, you know, the other members of the band besides Claudia aren't really interested in reflecting on the band, like particularly some of the longer like Astrid, who was the last singer, she's participated in some of the later interviews around different reissues, but other members of the band haven't. And like, I think if you read the book, you'll see a lot of the strife that was in the band, which I actually think is, you know, that was one of the things that was a little shocking on the first read, right? Where you're like, wow, you guys are really giving it to each other. This is a little, it's a lot, but also it's one of those things that like, I have felt that way about people I've been trapped in a van with for a month too. Like, you know, it's very natural and human. And I think there's also some grace to be given them. It's also really important to remember they were really young when this was happening. They were like Regula, the singer, was 18 years old. And then the rest of them were in their 20s, early 20s. And I think being able to give it that kind of distance and grace like allows for sort of this voice to stand alone.
So my question, well, I just want to say, like, one of the reasons that this is so exciting to me also is like process and like getting to see so much process in one piece of work that other people like willingly shared and were like hoping to from an initial piece is like super exciting. And even just now when you mentioned the strife of it, it's like I've always struggled with reading memoirs written by other people, biopics, all of it. Like I like throw books across the room. I've read them all, but I also hate most of them because they're just so like uncaring. And so like to me, this is like a very caring piece, and that's something that's exciting to me. And so sort of like to take from that process, I want to ask you both a question. I was super stoked when you were talking about the footnotes, because like I love footnotes, and like I love them, but there's something wrong with me. And like I'm curious about some of the things that you two learned from each other in this like process, especially because like 6 years is a long time to just like grow and change. And like I'm like specifically both of you, I would love to hear.
Well, we were already very close friends, I think, before this, and we're both very, very similar in a lot of ways. I think our stars are aligned, literally.
Literally, our star chart is exactly the same. Like all the houses.
So if people don't take any stock in that kind of thing, we can tell you that there is at least something in it. What did we? So, going through it, I think we both learned how to be patient and also be aware of like what the overall project is and where it should go, rather than based on like I want it to look like this.
Yeah,
that's incredible.
Also, mostly over Zoom. Like, I wish I'd included the picture of us looking at, when we were at the library in Switzerland, we like picked up all these books and we're like, this book feels good. This book feels bad. This is how big the book should be. And then we printed out all these things, and then we had like I feel like we had a massive fight about this font Connor wanted to use, and I was like, the tail on the Q is too long and flourishing on the capital Q, which like there probably are like only 5 capital Qs in the whole book, but I was like, ah! And it's also this thing of working on something for so long, and you're like, it becomes difficult to see the end, right? Where you're just like, oh my God. And then Connor, I feel like for me, was really good about being like, we're getting off the computer now and we're gonna drink a beer. That's a good one. Like, take a break. You can't work till the end of your life. Like, you have to take breaks to be able to walk away and come back to something. And also, I think, you know, like, it's a book. There's not an emergency. Like, it's gonna happen when it happens. There was some urgency around finishing it, and obviously I wanted to finish it. We wanted to finish it, but you know, taking the time where we needed to, and that was really good. I appreciate what you said about like other memoirs. Like, I think there's a couple books that I was thinking about a lot while we were making this. Like, Get in the Van by Henry Rollins is, if you haven't read it since you were a teenager, you should read it again because it's awesome. The research publications, which are like really jam-packed with stuff, and Cookie Muller's biography. These are all things that were like, a friend interviewed me recently about the book, and she named 2 of those, and I was like, that's amazing. You picked up on that, even though this thing doesn't look anything like that. It's about like a feeling. And so trying to have that feeling instead of a feeling of like endless droning about the past. Like, an oral history can be great, but also this book hopefully helps you feel like you're right there. Someone recently described it as a page turner, which I was like, whoa, okay, yeah, great. And I hope it has that kind of like urgent feeling for people.
And we did put a lot of effort into the page turning experience as well.
Yeah.
We were, you know, getting different weights of paper and being like, I don't know, what do you think? What do you think?
The amount of,
what do you think?
Yeah, what do you think? What do you think? And then, yeah, it's just interesting. It's like thinking about size, where you want something to be like big enough that it feels spectacular in a way, right? Where you can like look at flyers in this book and they're produced almost at full size. But also not so big that it's a coffee table. Like, this is something that you can like sit in your bed and read. And it's really, that's another thing that's really challenging that Connor worked really hard on, is like, you're dealing with materials that are so many different source sizes. Like, how can they all work on the page, and proportions? And that was a challenge. There's a little like some design tricks I learned, and hopefully it works. We won't talk about those. Yeah. I think we have time for one more and then wrap it up, or we can just wrap it up and go enjoy some snacks and wine and all of that.
You have to get off the computer sometime.
That's true. Yes. Yeah. Thank you. We did it.